TNA Wrestling has been on the rise ever since rebranding from Impact Wrestling back to Total Nonstop Action. And part of the rebrand and rejuvenation of TNA has been in the idea that the company was ready for something bigger. Bigger stars, bigger moments, and of course, bigger arenas. And as we saw last year, TNA held one of their largest crowds in over a decade in Montreal with over 4,000 in attendance, and they are now following that up in 2025 with announcing two major shows in two major markets. They will be holding Rebellion 2025 in Los Angeles at the Galen Center on April 27th, home of the USC Trojans, while in July for Slammiversary 2025, they will be headed to the UBS Arena in Long Island, New York. So TNA announcing two major shows in two major markets with two lofty goals. Selling enough tickets to make them viable, but on top of that, also proving that there is room for a legitimate third competitor in the professional wrestling space in North America. And that is something that would absolutely change the entire landscape of things for TNA. Think about where TNA was just a couple of years ago. Before the pandemic, Impact Wrestling had basically been run into the mud with the likes of Dixie Carter and others who were running the company at the time. And the Carters have had a very long and storied history at ruining companies that they've been a part of. But the way that Dixie Carter mismanaged, mishandled, and almost ruined TNA is something that can even be studied in a long-form video later on. But regardless, all of the trials and tribulations they went through led them to a point where people were done with the product. TNA, Impact Wrestling, I should say, was considered a dead product. No one was watching it on Pop, no one was excited for it, and yet they somehow managed to persevere after being purchased by Anthem Sports, and that gave them a window of time to prove that they were viable. And throughout the pandemic and through partnerships with other companies like New Japan and All Elite Wrestling, they were able to do that, and it really helped rejuvenate the Impact Wrestling brand to the point where they could actually rebrand back to TNA, taking on a name that everyone believed was run into the mud and making it stand for something again. And that is an epic achievement. TNA is no longer the punching bag of professional wrestling. Instead, it is now a place where some of the top talent in the world want to be. And it is also a place that has a partnership with NXT that highlights some of their talent on WWE TV. And while all of that is a great and massive achievement, but it pales in comparison to what they are trying to do. At a time where you have both WWE and AEW, two major professional wrestling companies that are basically taking the entire market share of the business in North American professional wrestling, leaving very little to the rest of the companies out there. For them to say that they are ready to hold an event in a market like Los Angeles, in an arena such as the USC Sports Complex, the Galen Center, which holds roughly 7,000 people, it is a lofty goal. But even loftier is this idea that TNA for Slammiversary would be able to sell enough tickets for the UBS Arena. The UBS Arena is a massive 20,000 seater that even AEW and WWE only hold between 10 to 12,000 with parts of the seats covered up. That is what TNA is up against. That is what TNA is trying to do. And while no one is expecting TNA to sell 20,000 tickets for either of these shows, I think it is going to be interesting to see if this experiment works. Nay, if this gamble works, because that is what this is. It is a gamble. Because you run the risk if you don't have success selling tickets in these markets, two very major professional wrestling markets, by the way, in LA and New York. You run the risk of exposing your brand and exposing your product to not only unnecessary criticism online, but also almost instantly taking all of the hype and goodwill that the product has, wiping it away. And that is not to say that TNA won't be a good product afterwards, But sometimes these perceptions that people have of your product and how hot you are and being the cool indie feeling thing, sometimes those are better than what the reality is. And the reality could be that TNA winds up selling 2,000 tickets for that UBS arena show, and they're going to have to move to a smaller arena. And I'm sure there are logistics for that being planned because, of course, nothing is guaranteed. At the same time, I also believe that with the right marketing, with the right energy, with the right booking, using stars such as Joe Hendry, who has really captivated the entire wrestling world through his ventures into NXT, becoming one of the most viewed things in the entire pro wrestling industry. I think a star like that is who you build these shows around. A guy like that is who you need to have as your world champion going into these shows, or at least be telling compelling stories with going into these shows, because he has that crossover appeal that makes him a draw. And that's not going to last past just this year. That is not going to last forever, especially when you consider the fact that Joe Hendry's TNA contract is up after 2025, so he is likely going to be headed to bigger and better things. You need to use him and book him while you still have him. So I think there is a formula for TNA to do this. And I also want to make another thing clear. While this is certainly a massive gamble for TNA, it doesn't necessarily mean that the gamble isn't worth it. Because if you do pull it off, then you continue a streak, a hot streak, you could say, that TNA has been on. You continue this ride, this wave that TNA has been on of success, of energy, of positivity that the wrestling industry needs right now, especially with a lot of the stories we're hearing from WWE and AEW. TNA has kind of slipped under the radar as a more positive blip on the entire pro wrestling industry. And I'm telling you now, if they are able to sell out these shows, or at least sell enough tickets to make the shows look good on TV, they will add even more positive energy to the entire pro wrestling industry. And at this time, positivity is definitely something that pro wrestling needs. So hopefully TNA is able to sell out these shows. Hopefully they are able to tell compelling stories going into them. But hey, I guess we'll see.